At the family company dinner, I got an unknown call. Don't reply to their questions. Just trust me. Leave when you can. I stayed. 10 minutes later, 4 men in dark suits entered and handcuffed my daughter-in-law as the entire hall fell silent.
Before we continue, comment where you're watching from and subscribe to the channel. We'd love to see how far our stories are reaching.
But let me start from the beginning of that evening, because nothing could have prepared me for what was about to unfold. I stood in front of my bedroom mirror, smoothing down the navy blue dress I hadn't worn in exactly 30 years. The same dress I'd worn the day Charles and I opened the doors of Hartwell Technologies for the first time. The fabric felt different against my skin now. Looser in some places, tighter in others, but it still fit. Charles always said this dress made me look like I could conquer the world. Tonight was our company's 30th anniversary celebration. Our company. Though lately, it felt more like their company, and I was just a relic from the past they tolerated out of politeness. The drive to the Grand Meridian Hotel took 20 minutes. 20 minutes of silence in the back seat of the car David had sent for me. Not David himself, mind you, just a car service. He was probably too busy with last-minute preparations, or so I told myself. The driver was polite but distant, nothing like Frank, who used to drive Charles and me to business meetings for 15 years until Victoria decided we needed to modernize our transportation budget. Walking into the ballroom was like stepping into a dream I no longer belonged to. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over round tables draped in crisp white linens. The company logo, the one Charles had sketched on a napkin during our third date, was projected elegantly on the walls. 200 employees, clients, and partners filled the space with animated conversation and laughter. I recognized maybe a third of the faces. The rest were strangers Victoria had hired over the past 2 years, young and sharp and efficient, looking at me with polite smiles that never reached their eyes. They knew who I was, of course. Eleanor Hartwell, co-founder, Charles Hartwell's widow. But to them, I was history, not present reality. Eleanor, you look lovely tonight. Victoria appeared at my side like she always did, suddenly, and with that practiced smile that had fooled everyone for so long. She wore a stunning red dress that probably cost more than most people made in a month, her blonde hair swept up in a perfect chignon. At 35, she was everything I had been once, young, beautiful, and hungry for success. Thank you, dear. I managed a smile. The ballroom looks beautiful. You've done wonderful work organizing this. She placed a manicured hand on my arm. It's important to honor the past while we build the future, don't you think? The way she said past made my stomach tighten. David is so excited about his speech tonight. He has some wonderful announcements to make. Before I could ask what announcements, she was gone, gliding across the room like she owned it, which, I was beginning to suspect, she believed she did. I found my assigned seat at table 7. Not table 1 with the family and board members, not even table 2 with the senior executives. Table 7, sandwiched between Harold from accounting, who'd been with us for 12 years, and Mrs. Chen, the wife of one of our smaller clients. Harold looked uncomfortable, glancing toward the head table where David sat with Victoria and the current board members, Mrs. Hartwell, Harold said quietly. I wanted to say thank you for everything you and Mr. Hartwell built here. Some of us remember what this company used to stand for. His words hit me harder than they should have. Used to stand for. Past tense. The dinner progressed with speeches from board members I barely knew, thanking the leadership team for another record-breaking year. Victoria had orchestrated everything perfectly, from the menu to the presentation slides showing our growth charts and expansion plans I had no part in creating. Then David stood up to speak. My son, 42 years old, looked distinguished in his tailored suit, every inch the successful CEO. But as I watched him adjust the microphone, all I could see was the 8-year-old boy who used to help Charles organize files in our first tiny office, dreaming of the day he'd run the company with us. 30 years ago, David began, his voice carrying easily across the room. My parents took a risk. They believed they could build something lasting, something that would serve our community and create opportunities for families like ours. A warm murmur rippled through the audience. I felt a flutter of hope. Maybe tonight would be different. Maybe he would acknowledge that I was still here, still part of this. My father, Charles Hartwell, was a visionary. His innovations in sustainable technology laid the foundation for everything we've accomplished. The screen behind him filled with photos of Charles in his workshop, Charles shaking hands with our first major client, Charles holding the patent certificate for his revolutionary water filtration system. The photos made my chest ache. Charles had been gone for 2 years, but seeing him larger than life on that screen made the loss feel fresh again. I touched the simple gold band I still wore on my left hand. Under new leadership, David continued, we've expanded beyond what even my father dreamed possible. We've streamlined operations, embraced modern technology, and positioned ourselves for unprecedented growth in the coming decade. New leadership. Not family leadership, not continued leadership. New leadership. As if the 30 years Charles and I had poured into this company were just a prologue to the real story that was beginning now. My phone buzzed in my clutch purse. I almost ignored it, but something made me glance at the screen. Unknown number. I shouldn't have answered. In any other circumstance, I would have sent it to voicemail. But something about the timing, the way my heart was already breaking as I listened to my son erase me from our company's story, made me slide my finger across the screen. Hello? I whispered, cupping my hand around the phone. The voice was male, older, familiar, but I couldn't place it immediately. Mrs. Hartwell, don't react to what I'm about to tell you. Just listen. Your Nora is about to destroy everything you and Charles built. Don't reply to their questions tonight. Just trust me. Leave when you can. Who is this? I breathed, but the line was already dead. I looked around the table, but no one seemed to have noticed my brief conversation. On stage, David was building towards something, his voice gaining momentum. Tonight, I'm proud to announce that Hartwell Technologies will be merging with Meridian International, creating the largest sustainable technology company on the East Coast. The room erupted in applause. A merger I knew nothing about. I felt the blood drain from my face as the implications hit me. Our company, the company Charles and I had built from nothing, was being absorbed into some corporate giant. This merger, David continued, represents the evolution our industry demands. We're not just honoring the past, we're building the future. Victoria rose from her seat at the head table, radiant in her red dress. She moved to the podium with the confidence of someone who owned the moment. And maybe she did. Thank you, David, she said, her voice carrying a tone of authority I'd never heard before. As the new Chief Operations Officer of the merged entity, I want to assure everyone that while we're embracing change, we'll never forget the foundation that brought us here. Chief Operations Officer. When had that happened? I was still a board member, at least officially. Major decisions like executive appointments required board approval. But apparently, those were just formalities now. Victoria was in full stride now, talking about efficiency improvements and market expansion, about leaving behind outdated practices and embracing innovation. Each word felt like a small knife, cutting away pieces of the life Charles and I had built. I was so focused on her speech, so lost in my growing horror at what was happening, that I almost missed the commotion at the ballroom's main entrance. 4 men in dark suits entered quietly, but there was something about their movement that made conversations pause. They weren't hotel staff or late-arriving guests. They moved with purpose, scanning the room until their eyes fixed on the podium where Victoria continued speaking. The lead man held up a leather wallet, showing something to the hotel manager who had rushed to intercept them. The manager's face went pale, and he stepped aside immediately. Victoria was still talking, gesturing elegantly toward the presentation screen when the lead man reached the foot of the stage. "Victoria Manning," he called out, his voice cutting through her words like a blade through silk. The room fell absolutely silent. Victoria's smile faltered for just a moment before she recovered, leaning toward the microphone. "I'm sorry, but as you can see, we're in the middle of a presentation. If you could wait until—" "FBI, ma'am. You need to come with us." The words hit the room like a physical blow. 200 people drew in their breath simultaneously, creating a sound like wind through leaves. Victoria's face went white, then red, then white again. "I'm sorry. There must be some mistake," she said, but her voice had lost its confident tone. "I'm Victoria Hartwell, Chief Operations Officer of Hartwell Technologies. You're Victoria Manning, also known as Victoria Hartwell, also known as Victoria Chen. You're under arrest for corporate fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy." I watched in stunned fascination as one of the agents stepped onto the stage. Victoria looked desperately toward David, who had gone completely still beside the podium. For a moment, their eyes met, and I saw something pass between them that made my blood run cold. Then David's wine glass slipped from his fingers. The crystal shattered against the floor with a sound that seemed impossibly loud in the silent ballroom. Red wine spread across the white tablecloth like blood, staining everything it touched. That's when I knew. Whatever was happening, David wasn't surprised. He was terrified, but he wasn't surprised. The agent was reading Victoria her rights now, his voice professional and calm, while she stood there in her red dress, transformed from corporate queen to criminal defendant in the space of 30 seconds. The cuffs clicked around her wrists with a finality that seemed to echo through the enormous room. As they led her away, Victoria's eyes found mine across the ballroom. For just a moment, the mask slipped completely, and I saw something I'd never seen before. Not just fear, but rage. Pure, undiluted hatred directed straight at me. As if somehow, impossibly, this was my fault. The ballroom remained frozen in tableau for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. 200 people watching the most successful night in our company's history turn into its most catastrophic. Then the whispers started, quiet at first, then building like a storm. The next morning hit me like a physical blow. I woke at 5:30, my body refusing to stay asleep despite the exhaustion that had finally claimed me around 3. The events of the previous night played on repeat in my mind like a broken record. Victoria in handcuffs, David's wine glass shattering, that look of pure hatred she'd directed at me as they led her away. I made coffee with hands that wouldn't stop trembling, then called David. It went straight to voicemail. I tried again at 7, 8, 9. Same result. By 10, I couldn't stand the silence anymore. I dressed carefully in my best business suit, the charcoal gray one Charles had bought me for our 15th anniversary. If I was going to face whatever storm was coming, I would face it properly. The drive to the office felt endless. I'd made this same trip thousands of times over 30 years, but today everything looked different. The familiar landmarks seemed to mock me with their normalcy. How could the world look exactly the same when everything had changed overnight? Hartwell Technologies occupied 3 floors of the Meridian Business Center, a building Charles and I had chosen because of its proximity to the university where we recruited our best engineers. The parking garage was nearly full when I arrived, which surprised me. I'd expected chaos, confusion, maybe even an empty building. Instead, it seemed like business as usual. The elevator ride to the executive floor felt like ascending to my own execution. When the doors opened, I stepped into a hallway that had been my second home for decades, but today it felt alien. The receptionist's desk was empty, which was odd for a Tuesday morning. I walked toward the office Charles and I had shared for 25 years. After he died, David had suggested I might want a smaller space, something more appropriate for my reduced role in the company. I'd refused then, clinging to the memories embedded in those walls. Now I wished I'd listened to him. But when I reached the familiar oak door with the brass nameplate that read Eleanor Hartwell, co-founder, I found something that stopped me cold. A new lock. Not just any lock, but an electronic keypad system I'd never seen before. And where my nameplate had been for 25 years, there was now a blank space, 4 small holes in the wood where the screws had been removed. My name was gone. I stood there staring at those 4 empty holes like they were bullet wounds. When had this happened? It couldn't have been this morning. Installing a new lock system would take planning, ordering, scheduling. This had been planned before last night, before Victoria's arrest, before any of this chaos began. I tried my old key anyway, knowing it wouldn't work, but needing to try. The traditional lock had been replaced entirely. I stood in the hallway of my own company, locked out of my own office, feeling more lost than I had since Charles died. "Mrs. Hartwell?" The voice behind me made me jump. I turned to see Jennifer Walsh, David's assistant, approaching with a manila folder clutched to her chest. She looked uncomfortable, her usual professional composure strained. "Jennifer, thank goodness. Can you tell me what's happening here?" "I can't get into my office." She shifted the folder nervously. "Mr. Hartwell asked me to explain the situation. He thought it would be better coming from me." "Better than what? Better than facing his own mother after what happened last night?" "The office is being restructured," Jennifer continued, her words carefully chosen. "Due to the ongoing federal investigation, certain areas are being secured. It's just temporary until everything gets sorted out." Ongoing federal investigation. The words hit me like cold water. What investigation? What does Victoria's arrest have to do with my office? "Art?" Jennifer's eyes darted down the hallway, checking to make sure we were alone. "Mrs. Hartwell, perhaps we should talk in the conference room. There are some things Mr. Hartwell asked me to explain to you." The conference room felt cavernous with just the two of us sitting across from each other at the massive table where Charles and I had made every major decision in our company's history. Jennifer spread several documents across the polished surface with the care of someone handling explosives. "The FBI seized certain files yesterday evening," she began. "Files related to patent sales and licensing agreements from the past 18 months. Patent sales." My heart stopped. "Which patents?" "The water filtration system, the solar panel efficiency improvements, and the atmospheric water generation technology." Charles's patents. The innovations that had made our company profitable, that had set us apart from every competitor in the industry. Charles had spent years developing those technologies, working 16-hour days in his laboratory, believing he was building something that would last generations. "Those patents aren't for sale," I said firmly. "Charles specifically wrote into his will that they could never be sold or licensed without unanimous board approval." Jennifer's face went even paler. "Mrs. Hartwell, they've already been sold, 18 months ago. The documentation shows that you approved the sales." "That's impossible. I never approved any such thing. I would never." She slid a document across the table. My signature was right there, clear as day, on a patent transfer agreement dated March 15th of last year. My signature, authorizing the sale of Charles's water filtration patents to Meridian International for $12 million. I stared at the signature, my own handwriting, on a document I'd never seen before in my life. "This is forged," I whispered. Jennifer was quiet for a long moment. Then she opened the manila folder and pulled out more documents, dozens of them. Patent transfers, licensing agreements, technology sales, all bearing my signature. All dated over the past 18 months. All authorizing the sale of everything Charles had created. "Mrs. Hartwell," Jennifer said gently, "Mr. Hartwell asked me to tell you that the FBI believes these sales were part of a larger scheme, that someone was systematically stripping the company's assets. Someone, not Victoria specifically. Someone. David wants to see me," I said. It wasn't a question. "He's in meetings with lawyers all morning, federal prosecutors. He asked me to tell you that you shouldn't worry about anything, that he'll handle the situation. He said the stress might be too much for you right now." Too much for me. As if I were some fragile elderly woman who couldn't handle the truth about her own company. I stood up abruptly. "I want to see him. Now. Mrs. Hartwell, he specifically asked." "I don't care what he specifically asked. This is still my company, Jennifer. I co-founded it. I've worked here for 30 years, and I want to speak to my son immediately." Jennifer looked genuinely distressed. "He's not here, Mrs. Hartwell. He left early this morning for emergency meetings downtown. He won't be back until tomorrow at the earliest. Emergency meetings about my forged signatures, about my husband's stolen patents, about my company's dismantling, and he hadn't bothered to include me. The woman whose signatures were forged, whose husband's life work was stolen, whose company was being destroyed. I was being managed, protected, handled. "I need to access my computer," I said. "My files, my emails. There has to be some record of how this happened." Jennifer winced. "Your computer access has been temporarily suspended. IT security protocols during a federal investigation. Everything will be restored once the situation is resolved. Suspended. My access to my own company's systems had been suspended. The final insult in a morning full of them. I walked out of the conference room in a daze, past employees who avoided my eyes, past offices that had once been filled with people I'd hired and trained, past 30 years of my own history that was being systematically erased. At the elevator, I ran into Harold from accounting, the man who'd been kind to me at dinner last night. He looked around nervously before approaching me. "Mrs. Hartwell, I'm sorry about all this," he said quietly. "It's not right. What's happening?" "Harold, how long has my computer access been suspended?" He glanced around again, making sure no one could overhear. 3 weeks, maybe a month. We were told it was for system upgrades, but he trailed off. 3 weeks, a month, long before Victoria's arrest, long before any federal investigation. They'd been planning this. "Harold, I need you to do something for me," I said. "I need you to print out everything you can find about those patent sales. Quietly. Can you do that?" He nodded quickly. "I'll see what I can access, but Mrs. Hartwell, be careful. People are scared. There are rumors that more arrests are coming." More arrests. I thought about David's pale face last night, about the wine glass slipping from his fingers, about the way he'd avoided my calls all morning. The elevator doors opened, and I stepped inside, watching the numbers count down as I descended from the company I'd built to the parking garage where I'd left my car. Each floor felt like another year being stripped away, another piece of my life being erased. When I reached my car, I sat behind the wheel for a long time, trying to process what I'd learned. My signatures forged, my patents sold, my office locked, my computer access suspended, all of it planned in advance, all of it systematic. Victoria hadn't been working alone. She couldn't have been. She'd only been with the company for 2 years, but these thefts went back 18 months, and the way Jennifer had delivered the news, the way David had avoided me, the way my own employees looked at me like I was some confused old woman who didn't understand what was happening. My phone rang. David's name on the screen. Finally. "Mom." His voice was strained, exhausted. "I'm sorry I haven't called. This situation it's complicated. David, I went to the office this morning. My nameplate is gone. My office is locked. My computer access is suspended. What the hell is going on?" A long pause. "Mom, the FBI is treating this as a major corporate fraud case. They've frozen access to anything that might be evidence. It's just temporary. Those are my husband's patents they stole, David. Our life's work. I know, Mom, and we're going to get it all back. But right now, the best thing you can do is stay home. Let the lawyers handle everything. This is too complex, too dangerous for you to get involved in. Too complex, too dangerous. For me, David, those are my signatures on those documents. Forged signatures. Someone stole my identity to steal your father's inventions. We know that, Mom. The FBI knows that. But you need to understand, this goes deeper than just Victoria. There might be other people involved, people who might try to hurt you if they think you know too much. Other people. People who might hurt me. Are you trying to scare me into staying away from my own company? I'm trying to protect you. Dad would want me to protect you. Don't you dare, I thought. Don't you dare use your father to manipulate me. Your father would want the truth, I said instead. He would want justice. And we'll get justice. But not if you interfere with the investigation. Please, Mom, trust me. Let me handle this. After I hung up, I sat in my car for another 10 minutes, staring up at the building where I'd spent most of my adult life. Through the windows, I could see people moving around, conducting business, making decisions about the company Charles and I had built. None of those people were me. I thought about the mysterious phone call from last night. "Trust the old employees," the voice had said. Harold had been trying to help me this morning, looking around nervously like he was afraid of being caught. Maybe there were others, people who remembered what this company used to be, who knew the difference between right and wrong. As I drove home, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being erased systematically and deliberately. Not just from the company, but from the entire story. In David's version of events, I was a victim to be protected, not a founder to be consulted. But someone had called to warn me last night. Someone knew what was coming and had tried to help. I needed to find out who. That evening, I found myself standing in Charles's home office for the first time since his funeral. I'd avoided this room for 2 years, unable to face the memories it contained. His reading glasses still sat on the mahogany desk where he'd left them. His coffee mug, unwashed, bore the faint ring stains of his final morning. But tonight, desperation drove me past grief. If someone was systematically destroying everything we'd built, maybe Charles had seen it coming. Maybe he'd left some clue, some record that could help me understand what was happening. I started with his desk drawers, handling each item like a sacred relic. Charles had been meticulous about documentation, keeping copies of everything, organizing files with an engineer's precision. But as I searched, I realized how much was missing. Entire folders that should have been here were gone. Patent files, partnership agreements, financial records from the last year of his life. Someone had been here before me. I moved to the wall of built-in bookshelves that housed Charles's technical manuals and engineering journals. Behind his collection of water treatment research, I found something that made my breath catch, a gap, a space exactly the width of a standard file folder, dust patterns showing something had been removed recently. But as I ran my hands along the shelf, my fingers caught on something unexpected, a small lever, nearly invisible, hidden behind the larger books. When I pressed it, a section of the bookshelf swung inward on hidden hinges. Charles had built a secret compartment. Inside was a metal document box I'd never seen before. My hands shook as I lifted it out and carried it to his desk. The box wasn't locked, but it was heavy, substantial. When I opened it, I found something that changed everything. A journal. Charles's handwriting, familiar as my own heartbeat, filled page after page. But these weren't technical notes or business plans. These were observations, suspicions, fears. The entries began 8 months before his death. March 3rd, David brought Victoria to the lab today. She asked very specific questions about the atmospheric water generator. Too specific. How would she know about the thermal exchange process unless someone had briefed her? David says she's just naturally curious about the business. But her questions were too focused, too technical. March 10th. Found Victoria in my office after hours. She said she was looking for David, but he was in Seattle at the conference. She had papers on my desk, claimed she was just organizing things to help me. But those were patent applications, confidential documents. Why would she need to organize those? March 17th. Checked the computer logs. Victoria has been accessing files she has no business seeing. Engineering specifications, patent portfolios, client lists. When I confronted David, he got defensive. Said Victoria is family now, that she's just trying to understand the business better. But Eleanor, if something happens to me, watch her carefully. There's something calculating about the way she looks at our work. I turned the pages with growing horror. Charles had been watching Victoria, documenting her behavior, recording his concerns. But the entries grew darker as the months progressed. May the 2nd, David is changing. Not just distant, but secretive. He used to tell me everything about his day, every problem, every success. Now he speaks in generalizations, avoids specific details. When I ask direct questions about new client contracts or licensing discussions, he deflects. Victoria is always there during these conversations, watching, listening. I think she's coaching him. May 15th. Eleanor doesn't see it yet, and I don't know how to tell her. Our son is lying to us. About the business, about decisions being made, about who's really calling the shots now. I found documents in his office yesterday while he was at lunch, preliminary agreements for patent licensing deals I never approved. My signature has been forged on preliminary paperwork. Nothing official yet, but they're testing to see if anyone notices. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the journal. Charles had known. He'd known that David was involved, that they were planning to steal his patents, that they were forging my signature, and he'd tried to protect me by keeping this secret, hoping he could stop it before it went too far. June 8th. I confronted David directly today, showed him the forged documents, expected him to be shocked to help me figure out who was doing this. Instead, he went pale and asked where I found them. Not who did this, but where I found them. He already knew. My own son already knew someone was forging signatures and he did nothing to stop it. June 12th. Victoria suggested I see a doctor about my confusion regarding business matters. Said I'd been forgetting conversations, mixing up details. David nodded along, said he'd been worried about me too. They're setting up a narrative where I'm becoming unreliable, where my concerns can be dismissed as elderly confusion. Eleanor, if you're reading this, trust no one but the old employees. Frank, Harold, Patricia from HR, maybe Jennifer if she hasn't been compromised. They know what this company used to be. I had to stop reading to wipe away tears. Charles had been fighting this battle alone, watching our son betray everything we'd built, seeing our life's work stolen piece by piece, and he'd died before he could stop it. July 20th. They think I don't know about the safe deposit box. Victoria mentioned it to David when they thought I was asleep during my chemotherapy session yesterday. There are documents there, papers that could destroy us if they fall into the wrong hands. I need to find out what they've been hiding. July 28th. Got into the safe deposit box. David had been forging both our signatures for months. Complete patent transfer agreements, all ready to be filed. They're not just stealing pieces of our technology. They're planning to take everything. The atmospheric water generator, the filtration systems, even the solar panel improvements I finished last month. 50 years of innovation, gone. August 3rd, David brought lawyers to the house today. Said we needed to update our wills, make sure everything was in order given my health situation. The lawyer kept referring to me as confused, asking if I understood the implications of various decisions. David and Victoria exchanged looks every time I asked questions. They're accelerating their timeline. My illness has given them the perfect cover. The final entry was dated just 1 week before Charles died. August 15th. Eleanor, if you're reading this, then I'm gone and they've made their move. I tried to stop this, tried to protect what we built together, but I ran out of time. David is not the son we raised. Something in him broke when he married Victoria. Or maybe it was broken before and she just found it. I've hidden copies of all the real documents in the safety deposit box at First National, box number 1247. The key is taped under the bottom drawer of your jewelry box. Fight for our company, Eleanor. Fight for everything we believed in. Don't let them convince you that you're too old, too confused, too emotional to understand business. You built this company as much as I did. You can save it. Trust Frank Miller. He knows everything. I made him promise to help you when the time came. I closed the journal and sat in Charles's chair, surrounded by the ghosts of 30 years of shared dreams. Frank Miller. The voice on the phone last night had been Frank Miller, our first employee, the man who'd helped us wire our original workshop, who'd celebrated every patent approval, every major contract, every milestone in our company's growth. Frank had tried to warn me. Charles had asked him to protect me. And I'd been so lost in grief, so trusting of my own son, that I'd nearly let them succeed. I looked around the office with new eyes, the missing files, the gaps in the documentation, the way David had encouraged me to take some time to grieve instead of staying involved in daily operations. Victoria's gradual takeover of decision-making, her subtle suggestions that I was becoming forgetful, unreliable. They'd been planning this for over a year, using Charles's illness as cover, using my grief as a weapon against me, systematically removing every person who might question their authority or remember how things used to be. I thought about the locked office door this morning, my removed nameplate, my suspended computer access, not security measures due to the federal investigation, preparation. They'd been preparing to erase me entirely, and Victoria's arrest had simply accelerated their timeline. My phone buzzed with a text message. David. Mom, I know today was difficult. The lawyers say the investigation could take months. Maybe you should consider staying with Aunt Martha for a while, until things settle down. Too much stress isn't good for you. Aunt Martha lived in Florida, 3,000 miles away from the company, from the investigation, from anyone who might help me understand what was really happening. They wanted me gone. I walked to the window that overlooked our neighborhood, the same view Charles had stared at during his final months while he planned and worried and tried to save everything we'd built. In the distance, I could see the lights of the business district where Hartwell Technologies continued operating without me, making decisions without me, planning a future that didn't include me. But Charles had given me weapons, hidden documents, loyal employees, the truth about what was really happening. Most importantly, he'd given me permission to fight. I returned to his desk and pulled out my laptop. If they'd suspended my access to the company systems, I'd have to work around them. I needed to contact Frank Miller, needed to get to that safety deposit box, needed to find out exactly how deep this conspiracy went. As I typed Frank's name into a search engine, I thought about Victoria in her red dress last night, so confident, so certain of her victory. She'd looked at me with hatred as they led her away, as if I had somehow orchestrated her downfall. Maybe it was time I did exactly that. But first, I needed to know everything. Every forged document, every stolen patent, every lie they'd told. Charles had started this investigation. Now it was my turn to finish it. I picked up my phone and dialed the number I'd found for Frank Miller. It rang twice before a familiar voice answered. Eleanor, thank God. I wasn't sure if you'd figured it out yet. Frank, I found Charles's journal. I know about the safety deposit box. I know David is involved. A long pause. How much do you know? Enough to understand that my son has been stealing from me for over a year. Not enough to know how to stop him. Then we need to meet. Tonight. There are things Charles couldn't write down, things he made me promise to tell you only if the worst happened. Worse than finding out my son and daughter-in-law have been systematically destroying everything his father and I built? Frank's voice was grim. Eleanor, what happened to Victoria last night? That was just the beginning. They've been planning something much bigger than patent theft, something that would have left you with nothing at all. After I hung up, I sat in Charles's chair for a few more minutes, feeling the weight of what was coming. Tomorrow, I would start fighting back. But tonight, I would grieve for the son I thought I had raised, and prepare for the war I was about to declare on the son who actually existed. I met Frank Miller at Murphy's Tavern at 10 o'clock that night, the same dive bar where Charles used to hold informal meetings with our core team in the early days, when we couldn't afford a proper conference room and made our biggest decisions over burgers and beer. It felt fitting, somehow, that this conversation would happen here too. Frank looked older than I remembered, his hair completely gray now, but his eyes still held the sharp intelligence that had made him Charles's right-hand man for 15 years. He was sitting in our old corner booth, the one with the cracked vinyl seat that we'd claimed as our unofficial headquarters, back when the company was just 5 people and a dream. Eleanor. He stood as I approached, pulling me into a hug that felt like coming home. I'm sorry it took so long. Charles made me promise to wait until you discovered the truth on your own. He said if he told you directly, you'd think grief was making him paranoid. We sat across from each other, the scarred wooden table between us bearing the ring stains of countless conversations from better times. Frank had a manila envelope beside his beer, thick with documents. How long have you known? I asked. About David? Charles first asked me to watch him about 10 months ago. About Victoria? We've been tracking her since she started asking questions about our patent portfolio 6 months into her employment. Tracking her? Frank opened the envelope and spread several photographs across the table. Victoria in business attire, entering buildings I didn't recognize. Victoria meeting with men in expensive suits at upscale restaurants. Victoria at a copy center, feeding documents into machines. Patricia Chen helped us. You remember Patricia from HR? She noticed Victoria was making copies of files she had no business accessing. Charles asked me to find out where those copies were going. I studied the photographs. Who are these people? Industrial spies, corporate intelligence specialists, people who make their living stealing technology and selling it to competitors. Frank pulled out a document with letterhead I recognized. Meridian International has been planning to acquire our patents for 2 years. Victoria wasn't just stealing our technology, she was conducting reconnaissance for a hostile takeover. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Meridian International. The same company David had announced we were merging with last night. Not a merger at all, but an acquisition that had been orchestrated from the inside. David knows about this? Frank's expression darkened. David has been Meridian's inside man from the beginning. They approached him first about 18 months ago, made him an offer to come work for them directly, but he turned it down. Said he couldn't leave the family business. So they found another way. Victoria. Victoria Martinez wasn't even her real name when she applied for the job. Her actual name is Victoria Chen, and she's been married twice before to men who owned small technology companies. Both of those companies were eventually acquired by larger corporations under suspicious circumstances. I felt sick. She's done this before. It's her specialty, corporate infiltration through romantic relationships. She studies her targets, learns their weaknesses, then exploits them. David was perfect for her purposes. Young, ambitious, insecure about living up to his father's reputation. Frank pulled out another document, this one bearing David's signature. This is the agreement he signed with Meridian 6 months ago. He would facilitate the acquisition of Hartwell Technologies from the inside, help them bypass our security protocols and access our intellectual property. In return, he'd be named CEO of the merged company with a substantial signing bonus. I stared at my son's signature, authorizing the destruction of everything his father and I had built. How much? $5 million upfront, another $10 million over 5 years, plus stock options worth potentially $50 million if the merged company goes public. $65 million. My son had sold our family legacy for $65 million. There's more, Frank said gently. Charles found out about the nursing home. What nursing home? Frank slid another document across the table. Meadowbrook Manor. It's a high-end memory care facility about 2 hours north of here. David and Victoria had placed a deposit and filled out preliminary admissions paperwork. They were planning to have you declared mentally incompetent and committed. The words on the page blurred as tears filled my eyes. Preliminary assessment summary. Patient, Eleanor Hartwell. Diagnosis: early-stage dementia with episodes of confusion and paranoia. Recommended care level: full supervision with restricted access to financial accounts and legal documents. This is dated 3 weeks ago, I whispered. Before Victoria's arrest. Before any federal investigation. They were planning to remove you entirely from the company. With you in a care facility and Charles gone, David would have had complete control of all company assets and intellectual property. I thought about David's suggestion that I stay with Aunt Martha, his insistence that the stress was too much for me, his dismissal of my concerns as confusion or grief, not protection, preparation. Frank, how did you know to call me last night? Harold from accounting. He'd been monitoring the FBI's investigation at my request. When he found out they were planning to arrest Victoria at the anniversary dinner, he called me immediately. I tried to warn you to leave before it happened, but I stayed. I managed a weak smile. Charles always said I was too stubborn for my own good. Sometimes stubborn is what saves you, Frank replied. If you'd left when I warned you, David could have spun the whole thing differently. Made it look like you were involved, or that stress had made you unstable. Your presence at the arrest, your obvious shock, that's what convinced the FBI that you were a victim, not a co-conspirator. Harold appeared at our table like a ghost materializing from the shadows. I hadn't seen him come in, but there he was, sliding into the booth beside Frank with a laptop bag slung over his shoulder. Mrs. Hartwell, he said quietly. I'm sorry about what happened at the office today. Jennifer wasn't supposed to show you those documents yet. David's lawyers specifically said you shouldn't see anything until they could control the narrative. What narrative? Harold opened his laptop and angled the screen toward me. The one where you've been gradually developing memory problems over the past year. Look at this. The screen showed email exchanges between David and various department heads, all dated over the past 8 months. Instructions to gently redirect my questions about company operations. Requests to avoid overwhelming me with complex financial information. Suggestions that my recent forgetfulness might be affecting my judgment. He's been building a case that you're incompetent, Harold explained. Every time you asked questions about the business, every time you expressed concerns about Victoria's influence, David documented it as evidence of confusion or paranoia. I scrolled through the emails, watching my son systematically destroy my reputation among people who had worked with me for decades. How many people believed this? More than I'd like to admit, Frank said grimly. David was subtle about it. Never direct accusations, just gentle suggestions that maybe the stress of losing Charles was affecting you more than anyone realized. But some people didn't buy it, Harold added. Patricia in HR kept asking questions. Frank started his own investigation. Jennifer started keeping copies of documents because something felt wrong. Even some of the newer employees thought David was being patronizing toward you. Frank pulled out his phone and showed me a contact list. These are the people Charles asked me to trust if something happened to him. Employees who remember what this company used to stand for, who won't be easily bought or intimidated. I recognized most of the names. Patricia Chen from HR, who'd been with us for 12 years. Marcus Webb from engineering, one of Charles's protégés. Jennifer Walsh, David's own assistant, who apparently had been documenting more than David realized. Even some newer employees like Sarah from marketing and Tom from the legal department. They've been waiting for you to fight back, Frank said. Charles made us promise not to act without you, not to try to save the company if you weren't willing to save it yourself, but he also made us promise that if you decided to fight, we'd give you everything we had. Harold leaned forward. Mrs. Hartwell, we've been quietly documenting everything for months. Financial irregularities, unauthorized patent applications, suspicious communications with Meridian International. We have enough evidence to prove that David and Victoria have been systematically looting the company. What about the federal investigation? That's just about Victoria's patent theft, Frank explained. The FBI doesn't know about David's involvement yet, or about the planned nursing home commitment, or about the Meridian deal. But if we give them what we have, David goes to prison too. Frank nodded. Probably for a very long time. Corporate fraud, conspiracy, elder abuse. The prosecutors love cases like this. I sat back in the booth, overwhelmed by the scope of what they were offering me. Complete vindication, total victory, and the destruction of my own son. Everything I wanted, and everything I never wanted, wrapped up in one terrible package. There's something else, Harold said quietly. Something we discovered yesterday that changes everything. He pulled up another document on his laptop, a bank transfer record, dated 2 weeks ago, $50 million, transferred from a Meridian International account to an offshore bank in the Cayman Islands. This is David's payment, Harold explained. He's already been paid for delivering the company. But here's the thing, the money isn't in his name. I leaned closer to read the account details. The transfer was made to an account owned by Victoria Chen. She double-crossed him, Frank said, took the money and ran. David delivered everything Meridian wanted, but Victoria kept all the money for herself. As far as we can tell, David doesn't even know yet. That's why she wasn't surprised when the FBI arrested her, I realized. She was planning to disappear anyway. She'd already moved the money and left David holding the bag, Harold confirmed. When the federal prosecutors start following the money trail, they're going to find all those transfers from Meridian going to Victoria's accounts. David's going to look like either a co-conspirator or the world's biggest fool. I thought about the look on David's face when Victoria was arrested, the way his wine glass had slipped from his fingers. Not just shock at seeing her arrested, but the dawning realization that he'd been played. What happens now? I asked. Frank closed the laptop and gathered up the documents. That depends on you, Eleanor. We can turn all of this over to the FBI tomorrow. David gets arrested, probably within a week. The company gets tied up in federal court for months, maybe years. Eventually, justice gets served, but there might not be much left to save. Or we handle this ourselves. Use what we know to force David out, recover the stolen assets, rebuild the company the way Charles would have wanted. It's riskier, and it means David might never face criminal charges, but it also means we control the outcome. I looked around the bar where Charles and I had made so many important decisions over the years. The place where we'd planned our first major expansion, where we'd celebrated our first $1 million contract, where we'd dreamed about leaving a legacy that would last generations. Now I was being asked to choose between justice and mercy, between punishing my son and saving the company he'd tried to destroy. I need to think about it, I said finally. Of course, Frank replied. But Eleanor, whatever you decide, decide quickly. David's going to realize soon that Victoria took all the money. When he does, he's going to panic. Desperate people make unpredictable choices. As we prepared to leave, Harold handed me a business card. My personal cell phone. Call me anytime, day or night. And Mrs. Hartwell? Charles would be proud of you. You're stronger than David ever gave you credit for. Walking to my car, I felt something I hadn't felt in 2 years. Purpose. I wasn't just a grieving widow anymore, or a confused old woman being managed by her son. I was Eleanor Hartwell, co-founder of Hartwell Technologies, and I had weapons now. The question was whether I had the courage to use them. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table with Charles's journal, trying to piece together the exact timeline of my son's betrayal. By dawn, I understood how systematically they had dismantled everything Charles and I had built. My phone rang at 7:30. David's name on the screen made my stomach clench. Mom? His voice sounded strained, exhausted. We need to talk. Can I come over? Of course. I kept my voice carefully neutral. Is everything all right? A bitter laugh. No, Mom. Nothing is all right. I'll be there in 20 minutes. When he arrived, David looked broken. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, his expensive shirt wrinkled, his eyes red-rimmed. This wasn't the confident CEO who had announced the merger 2 nights ago. Coffee? I offered, playing the concerned mother. God, yes. He slumped into one of my kitchen chairs. Mom, I need to tell you something. About Victoria, about the company, about everything. I poured coffee and waited. Let him tell me his version first. Victoria wasn't who I thought she was, he began. The FBI found things. Bank accounts, communications with competitors, evidence that she's been stealing from us for months. How terrible, I said carefully. You must feel so betrayed. David's laugh was hollow. There's more, Mom. Things I should have told you months ago. I knew she was stealing patents. Not at first, but I figured it out about 6 months ago. Why didn't you stop her? David wrapped his hands around the coffee mug. Because I thought I could control it. She had evidence of mistakes I'd made, financial irregularities. She said if I exposed her, she'd make sure I went down too. Lies. Smooth, practiced lies designed to make me feel sorry for him. I'd read the real timeline in Charles's journal. David hadn't been Victoria's victim. He'd been her partner from the beginning. What about the Meridian merger? I asked carefully. With the same company Victoria was selling our patents to. That seems coincidental. His face went pale. The merger. That's actually good news. It means we can recover some assets Victoria stole. Meridian's executives were shocked when they learned about her activities. My phone buzzed. A text from Harold. David just accessed his computer remotely. He's deleting files. Everything Victoria had access to is being wiped. David wasn't here to confess. He was here to distract me while he destroyed evidence. David, I think I need to be more involved in handling this crisis. Mom, no. You're already under enough stress. The lawyers think it's better if you stay out of it. They're concerned that testimony from you might not be reliable. Reliable. The word he'd been building toward for months. I see. I walked to the kitchen window. David, can I ask you something? Why did you remove my nameplate from the office? Silence. Security protocols. During a federal investigation, they have to control access to potential evidence. Another text from Harold. He's accessing the patent database now. Whatever you're going to do it fast. I made a decision. David, I need to show you something. I returned with Charles's journal. David's face went white when he saw it. Where did you find that? In your father's office, behind the bookshelf. You missed it when you cleared out his files. David reached for the journal, but I pulled it back. It makes for fascinating reading. Your father documented everything, David. He knew what you were doing. Mom, Dad was sick. The chemotherapy affected his thinking. Oh, his thinking was perfectly clear. I opened to a page. Listen, David brought lawyers to the house today. The lawyer kept referring to me as confused. David and Victoria exchanged looks every time I asked questions. David stood abruptly. Mom, give me that journal. Sit down, David. Something in my voice made him freeze. For the first time in years, I was speaking not as a grieving mother, but as the co-founder of Hartwell Technologies. Your father was dying, but his mind was sharp until the end. He knew what you were doing. He documented everything. David sank back into his chair. What do you want? I want the truth, not the story you've been rehearsing for lawyers. The truth about what you and Victoria have been doing to my company. For a long moment, we stared at each other. Two people who had loved each other for 42 years, now adversaries. Fine. David's voice was flat. You want the truth? Dad built a good company, but he was stuck in the past, still doing business like it was 1990, missing opportunities because he was too stubborn to modernize. So you decided to sell it. I decided to save it. Meridian offered us a partnership that would have expanded our reach, updated our technology, secured our future. But Dad refused to even consider it. And when he died, you found a way to get that control anyway, by doing what needed to be done. You never understood the business side, Mom. You were great at supporting Dad, but you never understood strategy, competition, market forces. There it was. David genuinely believed that Charles and I were too old, too stupid to understand what was best for our own company. So you decided to bypass us entirely. I decided to save the company despite you. Meridian was going to acquire us anyway. At least this way we got some control over the process. And made $65 million in the process. David's eyes narrowed. How do you know about that? The same way I know about the nursing home. The same way I know about Victoria's real identity. David, I know everything. For the first time, David looked genuinely frightened. Who told you? People who actually care about this company. People who remember what Charles and I built here. David was quiet, processing this new reality. When he spoke again, his voice was harder. It doesn't matter what you think you know, Mom. The merger is already in motion. You can fight this if you want, but you'll lose. You're one elderly woman against a team of corporate lawyers. We'll see about that. David stood up, straightening his jacket. The grieving son act was over. Mom, I hope you'll reconsider. Fighting this merger will only hurt you. The stress, the legal bills, the public scrutiny. At your age, it could be devastating. Is that a threat? It's reality. If you try to interfere with this merger, the lawyers will portray you as a confused old woman clinging to the paranoid fantasies of a man who was dying of cancer. After he left, I sat at my kitchen table for a long time, staring at Charles's journal. My son had just threatened me with crystal clarity, but he'd also revealed something crucial. He didn't know about Frank, Harold, Patricia, and the others. He didn't know that Charles had built a network of loyal employees ready to fight. David thought I was alone. He was about to discover how wrong he was. I picked up my phone and called Frank Miller. It's time, I said when he answered. David just showed me who he really is. Let's show him who we really are. 5 years later, I stood in the same boardroom where David had announced the Meridian merger, but everything had changed. The mahogany table gleamed under new lighting, and the walls displayed photos of Charles in his workshop alongside images of our current innovations. Most importantly, the nameplate at the head of the table read, Eleanor Hartwell, CEO. The battle had been swift but brutal. Within 48 hours of my phone call to Frank, we had assembled a coalition of loyal employees, original clients, and industry partners who refused to let Hartwell Technologies be absorbed into a corporate giant. Harold's financial documentation proved that David had been systematically transferring company assets to offshore accounts. Patricia's HR records showed a pattern of intimidation against older employees who asked questions. The FBI investigation expanded rapidly once they understood the full scope of the conspiracy. Victoria's arrest had been just the beginning. David was indicted 3 weeks later on charges of corporate fraud, conspiracy, and elder abuse. The Meridian merger collapsed when federal prosecutors froze all company assets pending investigation. But the real victory wasn't in the courtroom. It was in the rebuilding. I had taken the company private again, buying out shareholders who wanted quick profits and replacing them with employees who understood Charles's vision. Frank Miller became my chief technology officer. Harold earned a promotion to chief financial officer. Patricia now headed a new division focused on ethical business practices. Mrs. Hartwell, Jennifer's voice interrupted my memories. She still worked as my assistant, but now she was also studying for her MBA with company support. The foundation board is here for the dedication ceremony. I smoothed my navy blue dress, the same one I'd worn to the anniversary dinner 5 years ago. It still fit, though I'd had it altered to reflect the confidence I'd gained since that terrible night. The Charles and Eleanor Hartwell Foundation occupied the entire second floor of our building. What had once been executive offices for David and Victoria was now a resource center for small business owners over 50 who faced age discrimination or family pressure to sell their companies. Eleanor. Frank appeared at my side as we walked toward the ceremony. You should know David sent a letter. And I'd maintained no contact with my son since his sentencing 3 years ago. He was serving time at a minimum security federal prison, eligible for parole in 18 months. What did it say? Mostly the same things. He's sorry. He was trying to save the company. He hopes you can forgive him someday. Frank handed me the envelope. But there's something different this time. He asks about his daughter. David's daughter. Sarah was 12 now, living with his ex-wife in Oregon after Victoria's conviction destroyed their marriage too. I'd been sending birthday cards and Christmas gifts for 3 years, always returned unopened. Maybe it's time, Frank said gently. Charles always believed in second chances for people who truly earned them. The dedication ceremony was small but meaningful. 50 business owners who'd received grants or mentorship through the foundation, along with employees who'd helped build our new culture. No corporate executives, no merger announcements, no speeches about maximizing shareholder value. I stood at the podium where David had once declared our company's evolution, looking out at faces that reflected the values Charles and I had always believed in: hard work, integrity, loyalty to principles over profits. 35 years ago, I began, Charles and I started this company because we believed technology should serve communities, not the other way around. We lost our way for a while, but we found it again. In the audience, I saw Harold with his teenage daughter, who was interning in our engineering department. Patricia sat with 3 former employees we'd rehired after discovering they'd been forced out for asking inconvenient questions. Frank's grandson, a recent MIT graduate, was starting work on Monday as our newest product developer. The foundation will support entrepreneurs who face the same pressures we faced. Family members who think they're too old to understand modern business. Corporate raiders who see opportunity in their inexperience. Children who mistake loyalty for weakness. After the ceremony, I found myself alone in Charles's old laboratory. We'd preserved it exactly as he'd left it, down to the coffee mug with permanent stains and the reading glasses on his desk. But now it was a working lab again, where our team developed water filtration systems for rural communities and atmospheric water generators for disaster relief. He'd be proud of you. Frank's voice came from the doorway. Would he? Sometimes I wonder if I should have tried harder to save David. Charles always believed people could change. Charles also believed in consequences. David made his choices, Eleanor. You gave him every opportunity to choose differently. I thought about my son in his federal prison, probably working in the library or teaching computer skills to other inmates. The letters he sent were filled with explanations and justifications, but never quite acknowledgement of the people he'd hurt. Victoria had been released after 18 months and disappeared completely. The FBI suspected she was living under another identity, possibly married to another unsuspecting businessman. What about his daughter? I asked. Sarah? That's different. She was 8 when all this happened, old enough to be confused and hurt, but young enough to heal if someone shows her a different way. That evening, I sat in my home office with 3 letters spread across my desk. David's latest plea for contact, a report from our private investigator about Sarah's life in Oregon, and a draft letter I'd been writing and rewriting for months. Dear Sarah, you don't know me, but I'm your grandmother. I know your father has made mistakes that hurt our family, but those mistakes don't change the fact that you are Charles Hartwell's granddaughter and my family. I'm writing to invite you to visit our company this summer, not to reconcile with your father, but to learn about the grandfather you never met and the legacy he built. If you're interested in science or engineering or business, I'd love to show you what he created and what we're building in his memory. I understand if you're not ready for that kind of relationship, but I want you to know that when you are ready, there's a place for you here. Not because of obligation or guilt, but because you're family. And family means something different than what your father showed you. I signed the letter and sealed it before I could change my mind again. Some bridges burned completely, but others could be rebuilt if both sides were willing to do the work. 6 months later, Sarah spent 2 weeks with me during her spring break. She was quiet, cautious, brilliant. She had Charles's eyes and his methodical way of approaching problems. She also had her father's charm, but tempered with something David had never developed, genuine empathy. "Grandma Eleanor," she said on her last day, as we stood in Charles's lab where she'd spent hours learning about water filtration systems, "why didn't Dad just ask for help instead of stealing?" It was the question I'd been asking myself for years. "I think he was afraid, sweetheart. Afraid he wasn't smart enough or strong enough to live up to his father's reputation. Fear makes people do terrible things sometimes. Are you afraid of anything?" I thought about it seriously. I'm afraid of becoming so focused on protecting what we built that I forget why we built it. I'm afraid of making the same mistakes your grandfather and I made with your father. Sarah nodded solemnly. Maybe that's the difference. Dad was afraid of not being good enough, so he cheated. You're afraid of not being good enough, so you work harder. Out of the mouths of babes. Today, 7 years after that terrible anniversary dinner, Hartwell Technologies employs 300 people across 4 states. We've never pursued another merger or acquisition. Instead, we've grown organically, one innovation at a time, one relationship at a time. Sarah is 18 now, studying environmental engineering at Stanford. She interns with us every summer and has already contributed to 2 patent applications. She writes to her father occasionally, but has made it clear that their relationship will be rebuilt on her terms, not his. David was released from prison 2 years ago. He works for a nonprofit that helps other white-collar criminals find employment after release. We exchange Christmas cards now, nothing more. He understands that forgiveness and reconciliation are not the same thing. This morning, I woke up in the same house where Charles and I raised David, where I discovered his journal, where I made the decision to fight for our company's soul. But it doesn't feel like the same place at all. It's filled with photos of Sarah's achievements, letters from foundation recipients, thank you notes from employees whose families we've supported through difficult times. At 77, I have no intention of retiring. There's too much work to be done. Too many people who need proof that age brings wisdom, not weakness. Too many families who need to see that loyalty and integrity aren't outdated concepts. Charles always said that the best revenge against people who underestimate you is to exceed their wildest expectations. He was right about that, as he was about so many things. This afternoon, I'll drive to the cemetery where Charles is buried. I'll tell him about Sarah's latest patent application, about the small business owner in Vermont who saved her company using foundation resources, about the engineering team that just developed a water purification system that could help millions of people in developing countries. I'll tell him that we kept the promise we made 35 years ago in that first tiny office. We built something lasting, something that serves communities, something worthy of the Hartwell name. And then I'll drive back to the office, where there's always more work to be done by someone old enough to remember why it matters.